And welcome to the 33rd meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee in 2025. Today we have apologies from Ross Greer, and Maggie Chapman is attending as a committee substitute. So can I welcome Maggie Chapman and invite Ms Chapman to declare any relevant interests.
Thank you very much, Convener. I am Rector of the University of Dundee and colleagues should be aware of that, but no other relevant interests. Claire, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next item today is consideration of the Schools Residential Outdoor Education Scotland Bill at Stage 2. And can I welcome Liz Smith, MSP, the member in charge of the bill, and her supporting officials. Can I also welcome Jeremy Balfour, MSP, who has amendments, and the Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise, along with her supporting officials. The officials seated at the table are here to support the member in charge and the Minister, but are not able to speak in the debates on amendments. Members should therefore direct their comments or questions to Ms Smith or the Minister. Before I begin, I'll briefly explain the procedure we will be following this morning. The amendments that have been lodged on the bill have been grouped together. There will be one debate on each group of amendments. I'll call the member who lodged the first amendment in that group to speak to and move that amendment and to speak to all other amendments in the group. I'll then call any other members who have lodged amendments in that group. Members who have not lodged amendments in the group but who wish to speak should catch my attention. If she has not already spoken on the group, I will then invite the member in charge of the bill to contribute to the debate. The debate on the group will be concluded by me inviting the member who moved the first amendment in the group to wind up. Following debate on each group, I will check whether the member who moved the first amendment in the group wishes to press it to a vote or to withdraw. If they wish to press ahead, I will put the question on that amendment. If a member wishes to withdraw their amendment after it has been moved, they must seek agreement of other members to do so. If any member present objects, the committee immediately moves to the vote on the amendment. If any member does not want to move their amendment when called, they should say not moved. Please note that any other member present may move such an amendment. If no one moves an amendment, I will immediately call the next amendment on the marshalled list. Only committee members are allowed to vote. Voting in any division is by a show of hands, and it's important that members keep their hands clearly raised until the clerks have recorded the vote. The committee is also required to indicate formally that it has considered and agreed each section of the bill, and so I'll put the question on each section at the appropriate time. And now we've covered the process, we can move to the substantive business, and I call Amendment 1 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, group with amendments as shown in the groupings. Pam Duncan-Glancy to move Amendment 1 and speak to all amendments in the group. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the committee and good morning to Liz Smith as well. I'd like to set out at the start my thanks to the member for the way in which she has engaged with the bill and with members across the chamber. It's been really helpful to have that ongoing dialogue, the advice, support, but also help to understand the bill's purpose and how we can make sure that it meets the needs of all learners in Scotland, which, as members will know, has been one of the focuses of mine and my party's approach to this. We are supportive of the right to residential outdoor education and the bill and are pleased to see it having progressed to this stage. So thank you for the engagement to date. Amendment 28, if that's okay, Convener, I'll start with in this group, as well as talking to the rest of them as well. 1 and 2 are consequential, so that's why I want to start with 28. Seeks to insert a provision on the face of the bill to make it clear that engagement of teachers and associated professionals in courses of residential outdoor learning will continue to be on a voluntary basis. The introduction of the statutory obligation on education authorities under Section 6A would not affect the terms and conditions of employment of Scottish teachers and associated professionals, which are collectively bargained through the arrangements set out in the Constitution of the Scottish Negotiating Committee for Teachers. Currently, we know that teachers and staff in schools play a key role in the organisation and planning of activities out with school, including residential trips, and play a lead role in such activities in partnership with other school staff and parents. This role is often done on a voluntary basis and is pivotal to the experience of outdoor education for a number of young people. Yes.
I thank the member for giving way. Can you just explain, there seems to me a bit of a challenge there to tie these two things together, because if a school is required to send all their children away on a trip, and at an extreme, if no teachers are willing to volunteer, how does that work? Surely the two, is this not really destroying the purpose of the bill?
Thank you, and I thank the member for that intervention. I don't think it's destroying the purpose of the bill. It's certainly not my intention that would be the case. The principle of voluntarism, I think, is inherent in the bill. It's about the ability to be able to access outdoor education. I think that's really important. Evidence that this committee took suggests that teachers and staff, despite growing workloads, despite concerns about growing workloads in the classroom and the difficulty that it can be just now to be a teacher or a member of staff in a school, staff were still really positive about the experience that this could create for young people, and in fact were encouraged to say that I was encouraged to hear that they were still prepared to engage in it on that basis. So it's not intended to do that. What it does do, though, and other amendments in this group in my name seek to do, is monitor this, because we've seen, for example, in recent weeks, some concerns about teacher workload. And so I think it's important that we at least consider what the impact of this could be. But teachers, staff in schools, parents, pupils and indeed members across this Parliament have been really clear that giving young people a right to access outdoor education is crucial, and there is a willingness to make it work. What this amendment seeks to do is recognise that ongoing commitment of the teaching and education workforce, and also, coupled with the other amendments, to look at any potential impact it could have on them, so that it can be considered in the long term whether or not their engagement in it was having an impact on their terms and conditions. That's the intention behind this amendment. Introducing a legislative duty on education authorities to provide for delivery of a course of residential outdoor education, I don't think interferes with this principle. That's what teachers have told us, but they were rightly raising issues of workload, and that's why I brought these amendments, to draw that to the attention of Parliament, so that we're alive to these issues as the bill progresses. And we know that teachers are struggling with workload, and I think this protects established collective bargaining structures and ensures the principle of voluntarism, which has long governed the participation of teachers and associate professionals in such trips, is protected and will continue. Amendment 6 in my name seeks to ensure that the impact on staff is collected in data collection so that it can be monitored. And I think that speaks to my colleague John Mason's intervention around, what if it was a statutory requirement but nobody decided to volunteer for it anymore? What would that mean? Well, we would effectively come to a question of how do we continue to keep this going, and this amendment and the other amendments in this group seek to monitor that, but also make it clear that there is a long-established process for looking at teachers and staff in schools' terms and conditions, and that this bill wouldn't overwrite or undermine that in any way. It leaves, I think, Amendment 6, what the data and how often to regulations, but I think that's important, but I think it's important to collect nonetheless, so that we can monitor the experience in classrooms. And then, of course, it requires a report every 3 years, which I think is important, again, so that we can continue to understand the experience of learners and those working in the learning environment. Amendments 1, 2 and 7 are consequential amendments to Amendment 6. Amendment 29 provides that before preparing or revising guidance under the proposed Section 6B in the bill, that Scottish ministers must consult trade unions of school staff. The process of drafting and revising guidance, I think, must be genuinely and democratically representative of the voices of the teaching profession and of staff in schools. Professional associations have a long-standing approach to this, and this amendment seeks to ensure consultation on the guidance with the relevant trade unions will take place. Amendment 30 defines trade unions in the bill, and is, I suppose one could argue, a consequential of Amendment 29. Taken together, I think these suite of amendments consider the important impact that any change in schools can have on staff, but recognising the will and the benefit of outdoor education for all. I think together these suite of amendments create an environment where staff can be protected, pupils can access the right to outdoor education. And on that, I move those amendments, Convener.
Thank you very much. John Mason.
Thank you very much, Convener. Didn't realise I was quite so quickly. Following on from my intervention in Pam Duncan-Glancy, I continue to struggle to see how this would actually work in practice. As the member said, teachers are under a lot of pressure, and we have had concerns raised from the unions that if this moves onto a statutory footing, if there's a large increase in the number of young people going on these residential trips, then it will change the whole nature of them. And I totally support the idea of teachers volunteering. I think that is working at the moment. I think with a bit of extra money, we could build on that. But once we bring it into legislation, it seems to me that it's very difficult to maintain this idea of voluntarism. Yes,
I thank the member for taking that intervention, and forgive me for not looking in your direction when I say this. I want to read the exact wording on, in the amendment on this. The amendment that I'm proposing on voluntarism, first of all, I should say, is supported by the EIS, has said that it is about this particular bill not having any impact on the terms and conditions of employment of teachers and associated professionals, and highlights the Scottish Negotiating Committee for Teachers as the right and proper place for that to be considered. So it doesn't necessarily exclude the sorts of conversations or circumstances that the member highlights. It just says that the right and proper place to have those considerations is within the SNTC.
Well, I will be interested to hear what the member has to say on this area, and especially in relation to her amendments 13 and 14, which I realise are in the next group, because that is making it as far as reasonably practicable. And I do wonder if one of the reasons that it might not be practicable for a school to send kids on a residential trip is that there are no teachers or not enough teachers volunteering. So that's really just my question. I'm raising a question. I'll be interested to hear what the member has to say.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you very much, Convener. I welcome the amendments in this group and thank Pam Duncan-Glancy for lodging them and explaining their intent. These amendments, which concern impacts of the bill on staffing, look to address some very important and tangible considerations. Now, before considering the detail of the first in this group, Amendment 28, which seeks to protect the voluntary nature of teacher participation in residential outdoor education provision, I want to first put on record the Scottish Government's recognition of and appreciation for the amazing efforts of so many teachers and other education professionals and staff who currently give freely of their time to provide residential outdoor education for their pupils, enriching their educational experience. I also appreciate that there are teachers and education professionals and staff who, due to personal circumstances, may not be able or may not wish to attend or support a course of residential outdoor education. And it's important that the bill does not interfere with teachers' ability to make these decisions for themselves. Now, Liz Smith and I have met with teaching unions throughout the bill process to better understand their concerns, including those related to teacher contracts. And for assurance, the Government will continue to consult with teaching unions throughout the legislative process and implementation phase should the bill become law, and I hope that the member in charge would also be keen to make such a commitment. However, while I appreciate what Pam Duncan-Glancy is trying to achieve with Amendment 28, I think that careful consideration must be given to the approach that it presents. While I absolutely support the involvement of teachers and associated education professionals in giving their time and energy to support residential outdoor education should remain voluntary, it would not be appropriate to provide for that on the face of the bill. As we've alluded to already this morning, the terms and conditions of teachers and associated education professionals are governed by the Scottish Negotiating Committee for Teachers, a non-statutory tripartite negotiating arrangement entrusted with agreeing the terms and conditions of employment for our teachers and certain other education professionals. The national terms and conditions are set out in the SNCT Handbook of Conditions of Service, and I suggest that the best way to change those terms and conditions is by negotiation and agreement via the SNCT and not by the imposition of legislation on one area of those conditions alone. I therefore cannot and do not support amendments that cut across this long-standing arrangement between the teaching unions, local government and the Scottish Government. There are... Yes?
I thank the member for taking an intervention. The amendment, I understand the points the member's making. In actual fact, the intention of this amendment is to do is not to cut across that, which is why the amendment states that the right and proper place for these negotiations is that committee. Is there any sort of version of this that the Minister thinks could be considered at stage 3 so that we can protect the principle of voluntarism, but whilst also understanding that any changes to terms and conditions must be done through the right and proper mechanisms, including through collective bargaining?
At the moment, Convener, at the moment I do not believe so. I think that what is really key is going to be further engagement with the unions to understand, some of the complexities that we've, went over in this committee before. Sorry, could I just finish my response to Ms Duncan Glancy's? At the moment, the view that I have received from teaching unions is, the legislating in the way that the bill does preempts the SNCT, so this would take a step further. So which is why I think, further consultation with them is absolutely key in terms of moving forward with this progress. Sorry, Mr Briggs.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Convener. Thank the Minister for taking this intervention, because I think I agree with what she's saying. I think it's important when we actually look at where we are delivering in Scotland, my own local authority here in Edinburgh, but Aberdeenshire, Glasgow as well, that flexibility around negotiation for teachers has actually delivered that capacity. I think that's really important, that teachers actively are buying in and wanting to see this experience for their young people. So I wouldn't support these amendments, which I think would complicate that picture even further.
Minister.
I believe that's the impression that I got from the unions as well, that teachers really buy into these experiences, but placing that voluntary on the face of the bill, I think, could jeopardise that. Further, in relation to Amendment 28, there are also technical issues. I've mentioned that the SNCT is a non-statutory arrangement, so we shouldn't try to make law that relies on definitions and processes that rightly continue to evolve through engagement and agreement. And I'm very conscious as well that there's been no formal consultation with the SNCT on the desirability or otherwise of this amendment. However, of course, there would be an opportunity for the SNCT to consider the intent behind this amendment and agree to make an appropriate change to the SNCT handbook. That's why I think that engagement is very, very important. So should the bill pass at stage 3, I really want to reassure Ms Duncan Glancy that it is the Scottish Government's intention to engage positively with the SNCT on any implications for teachers' terms and conditions. I therefore would hope that she will not press Amendment 28. If she does, I cannot support it, and I would urge members to vote against it. Turning to Amendment 29, as I've said, I've met with Scotland's teaching unions on multiple occasions to discuss the bill, fully value their input and feedback in understanding the practicalities of how the bill might affect teachers. And I'm very clear that should this bill become law, the Government would absolutely look to continue to engage with the teaching unions to help inform implementation. Given how critical the teaching workforce is to implementing the bill's measures, it is only right and appropriate to acknowledge that on the face of the bill, to make clear they will be consulted with. I therefore encourage the committee to support Amendment 29. As such, I further support Amendment 30, which directly follows from Amendment 29 by defining what is meant by a recognised trade union. This definition is in line with existing legislation. However, I also acknowledge that some teachers will not necessarily be members of a trade union, and in line with our Fair Work principles, we should make sure that their voice can be heard too. So I'll further consider whether an amendment at stage 3 might be appropriate to make that clear. With respect to Amendment 6, I want to be clear that, as with any new piece of legislation, it will be important to establish robust monitoring and evaluation mechanisms should the bill become law. I therefore acknowledge that the intention of Amendment 6 is a valid and a valuable one. It's important that procedures are in place to monitor the impact of legislation in order that local government, Scottish Government and providers can adjust and evolve their approach as necessary. However, ministers do have the power under existing provisions of the Education Scotland Act 1980 to require education authorities to provide information, and grant conditions enable that for grant-aided schools too. And these are sufficient to establish appropriate monitoring and reporting, so I don't consider such a detailed approach to monitoring and evaluation on the face of the bill to be necessary. However, I have asked officials to consider how we might incorporate a general duty on reporting for stage 3. So I would hope that that reassures Pam Duncan Glancy that we do have a shared acceptance and commitment to the importance of this, and she will not press Amendment 6. If she does, I would encourage members to vote against it. And Amendment 7 is a consequential amendment that makes provision for the parliamentary procedure that would apply to regulations ministers would be empowered to make if Amendment 6 were passed. Amendments 1 and 2 are technical amendments to enable Amendment 7 to be made. Therefore, I cannot support Amendment 6, so it follows that I do not support Amendments 7, 1 and 2, which are consequential upon it.
And that's you finished, Minister?
It is.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. Convener, can I begin by thanking yourself, your committee, for all those who have lodged amendments to this bill, to the Minister and her officials and to my officials for the extraordinary amount of work that has gone into it. I know it's a relatively small bill in the grand scheme of things at Holyrood, but I really do appreciate the work that has gone in, particularly in terms of the scrutiny, and that has been immensely helpful to me as I engage with members. Turning to Group 1, can I thank Pam Duncan-Glancy for lodging these amendments for exactly the same reasons that I agree with the Minister, because they do cover very important issues, and it's good to hear that the Minister has made a commitment regarding Stage 3. And can I also thank Pam Duncan-Glancy for her opening remarks. She's been very diligent in her assistance with some of the troubling issues that we've had to negotiate. Can I turn first to Amendments 1, 2, 6 and 7, which are all linked, but I will focus principally on Amendment 6, which is the main amendment, as Pam Duncan-Glancy set out. There is no question at all that the impact of the bill on staffing has been a major issue that's come up throughout the whole passage of the bill, and having met the unions and COSLA alongside the Minister, I'm very aware of their ongoing concerns about some aspects of that. But that said, I'm also very aware of the evidence that points to the fact that the vast majority of teachers really want to be involved, if at all possible, in residential outdoor education. Some of the surveys are upwards of 90%. I think that's a pretty convincing figure. But nonetheless, as the Minister has rightly said, there are issues about contracts. On the question of data, I think one of the things that's been brought home to us throughout the three years that we've been discussing this bill, there has been a lack of data. Some local authorities have very good data, other local authorities do not. And I think that there's been a big question mark, and Pam Duncan-Glancy is right to raise that, about the quality of the data that we have, but also the quantity of data that we need to address some of the questions that are still out there. So if in addition to the requirement to provide residential outdoor education itself, if there are too many further obligations placed on staff as they participate in this, I think we've got to be careful that they don't become too onerous. I agree with Pam Duncan-Glancy about the need to oversee these the data from time to time, but I think we've got to be careful that what they have to do in terms of submitting that data and constructing that data doesn't become too onerous. That's a bit of a concern that I have. So in summary, I fully accept the principles behind Amendments 1, 2, 6 and 7. I would encourage the Minister and Pam Duncan-Glancy to discuss matters further on that. And I think it would be helpful if that discussion could take place, obviously, ahead of Stage 3, so that we can come to a common agreement on that. Turning now to Amendments 28, 29 and 30, I absolutely agree with Pam Duncan-Glancy about the need to ensure that we don't force people into residential outdoor education. That is not the intention of the bill. It never has been. I think it would be totally wrong for anybody to suggest that all teachers should participate. So that is not the intention of the bill. It never has been. And you know, I listened very carefully to what trade unions were saying about the fact that because of the pressures on teaching workforce, perhaps there are more teachers who are not participating. I think some of the evidence slightly contradicts that, but nonetheless it is a concern. And so that's something that I think we need to be mindful of. Yes, of course.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. She does express some doubt in these remarks, but does she think there are enough teachers willing to volunteer to get all the kids that should be going on courses to go?
Liz Smith.
Yes, I do, Mr Mason, and I think the evidence shows that. Mr Briggs referred earlier to his own local authority, where it's quite clear that there are substantial numbers of teachers who do want to participate. I'm very aware, why I mentioned my previous remark, I'm very aware of the fact that teachers in our schools are facing increasing pressures for lots of different reasons, which we'll probably debate this afternoon as well. So we do have to be mindful that there may be a time where we have to look at the situation for the future. But as things stand just now, I am very convinced through the evidence that not only are there lots of teachers participating now, but also that they are seeing the great value in residential outdoor education to address some of the problems that are affecting schools at this moment. So yes, I am comfortable about that. Just to sum up, when it comes to amendments 29 and 30, I think Pam Duncan-Glancy is absolutely right with these. It is essential, as the Minister has said, to continue to consult with the trade unions. The Minister asked if I would make a commitment. Yes, I will, because I think that's essential. So I'm very happy with these two amendments. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Pam Duncan-Glancy to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 1. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. Starting with the conversation around voluntarism and the principle of voluntarism, I think it's clear from the conversation that we've had that the evidence suggests that there will be teachers and staff in schools who are prepared to continue to support young people to access residential outdoor education. What's also clear, though, I think, and I welcome some of the commitments that I've heard both from the Minister and also from the member in charge around the fact that if that weren't to be the case, the right place to negotiate that is the SNCT. And I think that with that assurance, I'd be prepared not to move Amendment 2028. I think it would be helpful if there are ways that we can discuss between now and stage 3 on even just a shorter but clear statement that says if this was not the case, the SNTC is the place to do it. But I recognise the commitment on the record that there's a recognition both from the government and other members that SNCT is absolutely the place to address these concerns. I also welcome the support, of course, for Amendments 29 and 30 for trade unions to be recognised in the bill and their importance in terms of consultation. I take the Minister's point too, that there are others who should be consulted, but I think it's important that we recognise the long-established structures that trade unions bring, and that's why I brought those amendments, and I'm pleased to move them today. On the points around data sharing and reporting and understanding the impact on staff, again, I think that speaks to the point about voluntarism and concerns about, if this was a right in statute and suddenly nobody wanted to volunteer to help out, what would we do? I think we're around this table just now, we are addressing that, which is, again, the places in the SNCT. But nonetheless, I think it's important to look at that in the same way that I think we have to gather other data in education to look at the experience of staff in schools as well. And so I welcome the Minister's offer to work between now and stage 3. I'd welcome engagement, tripartite, if you call it that, between the Minister, the member in charge and myself to look at how we could create a potential amendment at stage 3 that is workable, because I think it is important that we monitor that. And so on that basis, and let me just consult the numbers so that I get them right, I'm not going to move amendments 1, 2, 6 and 7 or 28. I will move amendments 29 and 30. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Pam Duncan-Glancy seeks to withdraw Amendment 1. Does any member object? No member objects, so Amendment 1 is withdrawn. I call Amendment 2 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 1. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 13 in the name of Liz Smith, group with Amendment 14. Liz Smith to move Amendment 13 and speak to both amendments in the group. Ms Smith.
Thank you, Convener. Amendments 13 and 14, these qualify the duties on education authorities and managers of grant-aided schools to provide or secure the provision of one course of residential outdoor education. Just to be technical for a minute, they do so by inserting the words "so far as reasonably practicable" into subsections 1 and 2 of inserted section 6A of the Education Scotland Act 1980, which is inserted by section 1 of the bill. Now, I've lodged these amendments following extensive discussions with the Scottish Government. They've been lodged to ensure that in situations where it is simply not possible for the duty to be met, then the education authority or the manager of the grant-aided school, they do not automatically find themselves in breach of the provisions of the bill. For example, if a trip had to be cancelled because of a fire at the centre, which tragically we had at one centre not long ago, or a flood in the outdoor centre, or storm, or whatever it might be, then that results in an individual obviously not receiving their entitlement, but it would be quite wrong for that authority or the manager who be liable for that. That's not right. So that's why it's in as this amendment. And when I first discussed it with the Minister, I did have a slight concern that these amendments could be used to dilute the duty of the bill. However, I've been reassured, as I indicated in my letter to the committee last week, so far as reasonably practical, it will not result in watering down of the bill. The Minister... yes, of course.
John Mason.
Not to labour the point too much, but does she think if there weren't enough volunteer teachers in a school for a trip, that would be one of the reasonable reasons?
Liz Smith.
I don't think it is in the context of how legislation is written, because this phrase comes up in other legislation, which is one of the reasons why I've lodged this amendment. So, no, I don't. I don't think that's the same concern. This is about issues where it's beyond anybody's control. Yes, I'm quite satisfied that this, the insertion of these words addresses what we need to address in this particular part of the bill. So I move Amendment 13.
Thank you very much. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to start, this is the first opportunity I have had to acknowledge and welcome the extremely constructive approach of the member in charge since stage 1. In working with me and with my officials to identify ways that we can improve the bill's provisions. Group 2, I think, provides an important example of the outcome of that work. The 2 amendments in this group, Amendments 13 and 14, seek to strengthen deliverability of the bill, and I very much welcome Liz Smith's agreement to bring them forward. These amendments recognise the real-world challenges and circumstances out with an education authority or grant-aided schools control, which may mean that they are unable to ensure provision of residential outdoor education for some pupils despite their best efforts. So we've heard some examples in relation to centres, but these can also be adhered to pupils as well. So, for example, a pupil may move school in year and their new school has determined that the most reasonable approach to provision is to offer the residential to their year cohort on an annual basis. In this circumstance, it might not therefore be reasonable for the law to require the school to arrange an additional residential trip solely for the individual pupil if they've already provided the opportunity to their wider class cohort earlier in the term. Yes.
Jeremy Ball.
Thank you, Convener. I'm grateful to the Minister. I think just so we can seek absolute clarity on this, so going forward, if a local authority was under financial pressure, that would not be a reason to stop a school or a grouping of schools from providing outdoor activity.
Minister.
I don't believe so. I'm actually glad Mr Balfour's brought this point up because I think it also relates to the point that Mr Mason made. I would hope that, in relation to amendments that we will see and speak to later in the course of this morning, I would hope that much of these issues will have been resolved in advance of commencing the bill. So issues around financing, issues around teaching, and then it really should only come down to these, external factors that are out with the school's control, where that should fall in. So thank you for that question, Mr Balfour. So, for example, another example may be where a pupil is unwell and can't attend the residential at the time that the school has arranged for it. I think it seems important that we build in that degree of protection and flexibility for education authorities in the case where external factors make it impracticable for that duty to be met. So I would ask members to support these amendments, and I just want to acknowledge Ms Smith's concerns that she put on the record around, or earlier concerns I may add, and just want to be clear, however, it is absolutely not the Government's intention in supporting these amendments to water down the overall duty or weaken the expectation that every effort will be made to offer residential opportunities that meet the intent of the bill, and I think that's in line with my response to Mr Balfour's comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call on Liz Smith to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 13.
Nothing really further to say other than that I very much welcome these assurances and I will press 13.
The question is that Amendment 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call Amendment 14 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 13. Liz Smith to move or not move?
That's moved.
The question is that Amendment 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call Amendment 15 in the name of Liz Smith, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. I would point out that if Amendment 17 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendments 5, 12, 22, 23 and 24 due to a preemption. Liz Smith to move Amendment 15 and speak to all amendments in the group. Ms Smith.
Thank you, Convener, and I move Amendment 15. Can I crave your indulgence, Convener? This is the section where I think we've had the most constructive engagement, but perhaps also the most lengthy engagement, so I've got quite a lot to say in this section, given its importance. Both Amendments 15 and 17, these relate to the funding of residential outdoor education. And I've lodged both of these amendments following very constructive recent engagements with the Minister, and I've lodged them in good faith given the commitments that she has made within these meetings. Amendment 15 places a new section into inserted Section 6A to enable education authorities and the managers of grant-aided schools to require parents of pupils to make a financial contribution to their child's residential outdoor education. I've always been of the view that there should not be a barrier on parents contributing to their child's residential outdoor education. That's what happens at present, and we must not do anything that would undermine that. Inserted Section 2A, provided for by Amendment 15, enables this to remain the case for residential outdoor education provided under this bill. I consider that this also addresses some of the very important concerns raised at Stage 1 and since by Mr Mason, who made, I thought, some very strong points about ensuring that we don't undermine any of the current payments that are made towards outdoor education. That's very important that we don't do that. Amendment 17 removes the duty on Scottish ministers to fund the education authorities and the managers of grant-aided schools such amounts that are sufficient to enable them to carry out their duties under this bill. That amendment has probably involved the most amount of discussion and negotiation, but I accept the Minister's argument that a blanket duty to fund may constrain the government in how it accesses different sources of funding to pay for residential outdoor education. And that's an important consideration, and I'm grateful for the Minister's time on that. I had residual concerns that the removal from the bill would simply shift the focus away to local authorities and the managers of grant-aided schools. However, the Minister has given me a commitment in her letter of assurance about the funding package that will be negotiated between the Scottish Government and the local authorities under the Verity House Agreement. Before moving that formally, I just would like, on the record, the Minister just to give that further assurance, because I think it's very important that members of the committee feel that that assurance is there, because that's important to everybody in the sector, to all schools and everybody who's participating in residential outdoor education. And then when it comes to the provision for those pupils whose parents cannot afford it, namely those who are in receipt of universal credit or income support, and similarly parents of pupils with an additional support need, they should not have to pay an extra amount for residential outdoor education. I think that covers some of the concerns from several members around the table. That's a commitment I've had from the Scottish Government. I'm sure the Minister will speak to that in her remarks here too. So, assuming that there is that assurance from the Minister, I will be pressing Amendment 17. Turning now to other amendments in the group, can I come to 3 and 4? And Amendment 5 in Pam Duncan-Glancy's name. If 17 is accepted, then 5 will not be seen to move forward. When it comes to 3 and 4, I've spoken to Pam Duncan-Glancy about this. I understand the principles behind what she's trying to do, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister what she will say on Amendments 3 and 4. I think, as I say, providing the Minister can give me that assurance about Amendment 17, I will be pressing that. And then can I turn to John Mason's amendment in the group 11 and 12? It's a matter of public record that John Mason and I have different views about this bill, but over the course of the passage, I do want to thank him for his very constructive engagement and his approach to Stage 2. The issue of PEF funding and how it's used, and indeed how much of it is used for residential outdoor education, that came up a lot in stage 1. It's come up since, and it remains a very live issue. I'm wary of it being too explicit on the face of the bill about funding, particularly in respect to something as specific as PEF funding is. It's a discrete fund that the Scottish Government, rightly in my opinion, set up. For example, in time there may be other funds which could be used for pupils' participation. So I would encourage Mr Mason not to press his amendment, since I think we can cover that with the other amendments that we have in this group. Turning now to Amendment 12, again, can I thank John Mason for lodging that amendment. At the outset, I would say that, as with Amendment 5 from Pam Duncan-Glancy and Amendments 22 to 24 from Jeremy Balfour, if Amendment 17 in my name is to be agreed to, then these amendments fall due to the preemption. Nevertheless, as with other amendments, I think there is significant merit to the policy intent underpinning these amendments and ensuring that pupils from socio-economic disadvantage are not required to pay. So I think we are up to Amendments 22, 25 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Can I thank Jeremy Balfour for his engagement, and can I also compliment him on the way that he goes about the very constructive discussions for those who have additional support needs. Jeremy, I think you do this Parliament proud in the way that you represent them, and I'm very grateful to you. The principle behind Amendment 22 accords with my position that parents of children with additional support needs should not face the additional costs. In relation to Amendment 23, I think Mr Balfour has highlighted these issues. So I do agree with the principle that young carers should not face these additional costs. I think the Minister and I would be very happy to meet with Mr Balfour just to discuss these matters a bit further before we get to stage 3. I have a few concerns about Amendment 24. I understand the principle behind it, but I'm concerned that it would constrict managers of grant-aided schools in seeking alternative sources of funding to support their provision of residential outdoor education. I really like to see them have the flexibility to seek these alternative sources where appropriate, and we obviously know of some providers who are willing to make that provision. And that's why I really lodged Amendments 15 and 17 to ensure that the education authorities and managers of grant-aided schools have that flexibility. And on Amendment 25, I recognise the role that Mr Balfour has played in scrutinising and shaping the Social Security Scotland Act 2018. Again, I'm supportive of the principle behind the amendment because it chimes with my position on the families of pupils with additional support needs who may be in receipt of child disability payment. They should not have to pay extra. That said, I'm not persuaded that some of this needs to be on the face of the bill. I'll listen to the arguments, in particular the comments of the Minister on this matter, but I do think, as far as Mr Balfour is concerned, I think there is scope for further discussion before we get to stage 3, but can I thank him for laying these amendments. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. I call Pam Duncan-Glancy to speak to Amendment 3 and other amendments in the group. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. Amendment 3 in my name seeks to ensure that self-directed support can be considered a source of support or funding for pupils with additional support needs. There is not always a widespread understanding of what that funding can be used for. And for some pupils with additional support needs, those additional needs include social care. And I believe, and I think members across the Parliament believe, that those costs shouldn't prohibit young people with additional support needs who need access to social care from accessing residential outdoor education. And I guess in this amendment, I'm trying to be imaginative, but use all of the sources of support that are available to young people with additional support needs and disabled people, so that schools have a wide range of options so that they get the best chance of actually being able to meet that requirement, and young people who have additional support needs will be able to go on residential outdoor education. Self-directed support has been a mechanism to access social care for a number of years now. I don't know that it is yet fully understood or fully utilised for young people, particularly in their access to education. And my understanding is that this is an opportunity for us to create a purpose in the bill for self-directed support, or a clause in the bill for self-directed support to be used as a source of support. And I think it could be, in some cases, the difference between a young person going on residential outdoor education and not going on residential outdoor education. So I think it's really important. Some of these costs from schools can be quite difficult, and I can see amendments from other members who have also recognised that this shouldn't prohibit people accessing outdoor residential education. I think that's a really important principle, that the additional costs associated with disability or additional needs shouldn't be borne by families themselves, and they should not prevent people from taking part. And so there's a suite of amendments in this space that look to address that. And self-directed support, I think, is one mechanism that could imaginatively be used and accessed by schools, by young people, by families to support them to do this. Amendment 4 defines self-directed support as per the 2013 Act. And Amendment 5 says that additional support needs must be considered and that no pupil is required to pay additional costs of their own additional support needs. I recognise the point that the member has made around the preemption. So I should say at this point, if it gets to it, when it comes, I think there is an important principle about pupils with additional support needs not having to bear the brunt of the additional costs. I look forward to hearing the Minister's comments on that, but I'm minded not to press Amendment 5, given that I think, well, first of all, it would be preempted by an amendment that I think probably will carry the support of other members for the reasons that the member in charge has set out. But I would nonetheless like to put on the record, once again for clarity, that all young people should be able to access residential outdoor education equally. That's been the aspiration that I've had. That's been the aspiration that many members, including Jeremy Balfour and indeed Liz Smith, the member in charge, and I think the Minister too, all share. And it's incumbent on all of us to be as supportive of that happening as we possibly can. I think it's Amendment 3 in particular, the substantive amendment in my name in this group, does that and provides a source of support that could assist young people in accessing this essential part of their education. Thank you.
Thank you. John Mason to speak to Amendment 11 and other amendments in the group. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much. And I also fully support the aims of this bill, and I hope I've made that clear in the past, and I certainly would want to do so again. I think the idea of young people going on an outdoor residential course is absolutely tremendous, and most of us have benefited from that at some time. My primary concerns about the bill were the costs, and perhaps somewhat unusually, I was the one that was thinking the money should be targeted, and a Conservative member, Liz Smith, was feeling it should be a universal benefit. However, I think we have reached a better place now. I lodged my amendments really to get the ball rolling on the finance side before I had seen any of the others, and in particular I'm very happy with Amendment 15, because that would continue the present position of parents who can afford it paying for their children's experience. And I think that is absolutely right. I just think with money being tight, we cannot afford to have the government paying absolutely for everyone where some people can afford it. So I'm more than happy to go along with 15, which I think supersedes largely what I was trying to do. I was looking to use the PEF money, the Pupil Equity Fund, as a means of really topping up what is already happening. I mean, I still question that could have happened perhaps without the bill, but anyway, we are going ahead with the bill. And I take the point, I know the Minister's got reservations about specifically mentioning the PEF fund as well. I suppose I'm left in a bit of uncertainty as to how much money, excuse me, the government is going to end up paying for all of this. And I just wonder if we're going to get a revised financial memorandum. Liz Smith and I are both in the Finance Committee. It does seem that if all these amendments go through, or at least some of them, it is going to make quite a lot of difference to the original costs in the bill. And my understanding is that there can be or should be a revised financial memorandum after stage 2. So I will be interested to see if that happens. But thanks very much.
Thank you. I call Jeremy Balfour to speak to Amendment 22 and other amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to members. If I can maybe just take a couple of moments just to outline some general principles behind this. But can I start, first of all, Convener, by thanking both Liz Smith and the Minister for the constructive dialogue that we've had so far, and I hope that will continue. Can I say also that I absolutely support this bill? If you ask my daughters what their two favourite weeks have been at school so far, it was their primary 7 and S1 visit, and which every week could be like that in school. So I absolutely see the benefit of this, and I'm pleased that this will be rolled out to every child in Scotland. And I think that is the key phrase for me around this bill. That what I think we need to make sure is that every child has the opportunity, if they want to have access to this outdoor education. Now, it may look different in different circumstances, but that overriding principle is key. And as I often say, we are not looking just at a bill or an act for a few months or a few years, but we have to make sure that we are future-proofing this legislation for governments which we do not know will look like. And I know, having spoken both to the Minister and to Liz Smith, that they are absolutely committed to this. Sadly, the Parliament is losing both these individuals in 6 months' time. We do not know what will come next. And what I want to make sure is that this bill is good not just for the next year or 2 years, but it's good for the next decade and beyond. If I can turn briefly just to my amendments, Convener. Amendment 2 is regard to a carer to attend residential outdoor education. Really, one of my concerns is that we say every child can have outdoor education, but not every child can have that outdoor education unless they have the care support there with them. For some individuals, that may be able to be provided by the outdoor centre themselves, may be provided by the teachers and others that go with the school. But for some children, they will require their carers to be with them in regard to personal care, in regard to reassurance, in regard to medication, in regard to other issues. That will mean that accommodation will need to be found for them, the cost will need to be met by them. And we all know that local authorities are under financial pressure already, and that may continue in future years as well. So what this amendment seeks is to remove any barrier to ensure that a child can attend with the appropriate care in place. Because I do wonder, and I do slightly worry, that if we don't do this, we will be saying every child can go, but they have to go by themselves, or they have to go with the support of the teacher, which may not be appropriate in every case. Amendment 23, I think, again, seeks to safeguard some of the most vulnerable children in our society. I know many of us go every year to the carers outing in the summer where we meet young carers. I know often we have debates and we say very positive things about young carers. But there are at least 30,000 young carers under the age of 18 in Scotland who are providing care for somebody within their family, whether that is a sibling, a parent, or a grandparent. Now, if that care is such that if it's not met, the person cannot survive because of medication or toileting or food provision or any of those things, that young carer won't be able to go because who will provide the care? And so, again, we can sign up to the principle that every child should go, but unless the local authority can put in place the appropriate care for that individual for the days that that person is away, they clearly wouldn't then be able to go on it. I welcome, and I'll be interested to see what the Minister has to say in a few moments. I welcome Liz Smith's openness to have a further discussion at stage 3 on these issues, whether they should be within regulations or in another place. I think that would be helpful to discuss. Like Pam Duncan-Clancy, I think Amendment 17 will pass. If it happens to fall, then I won't press 22 or 23, but we'll look forward to having discussions both with both individuals. In regard to Amendment 24, and perhaps this is again an amendment we can come back and look at in regard to stage 3, my amendment was simply to make sure that the Scottish Government going forward don't see that the funding that they are given to these schools as part of what is included in that standard grant. That the money coming for this should be extra money and has to be new money. Again, I'm open to discussions with both the Minister and with Ms Smith after today. And finally, Convener, Amendment 25. In 2024, there were 33,815 children between the ages of 5 and 15 receiving child benefit. That equates to approximately 5% of the school enrolment in Scotland. Now, I accept that number is going up, but it is still a fairly small number. And again, I think for parents who, with a child that has a disability, inevitably has extra financial responsibilities, to just absolutely make sure that those parents don't have to pay for their child to go. I've spoken to, as I'm sure others get correspondence, a number of parents who are right on the margins. They may not be on universal credit, they may well be working, both parents may be working, but that extra cost of having to go away for a week, because of the extra cost they have with disability, would stop their child being able to go. And I think that would be a disappointment. Again, I welcome the comments from Liz Smith, and I hope that we can have productive conversations between today and stage 3. And with that, I rest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Convener. I think it's really reassuring that there's a shared commitment and intent across the Parliament to ensure that residential outdoor education becomes more inclusive. This includes ensuring that the ability of a parent to pay for their child to participate in residential outdoor education, particularly where the child and their family might face additional costs to that participation, is not a factor that leads to the child's exclusion from the experience. I should have actually started off just with an apology for how long my speaking note is for this group, so please bear with me. So I welcome that we have a group of amendments concerned with funding for the provision of residential outdoor education. Affordability of the bill has been, of course, an important point of debate for this committee, for Parliament more widely, and between myself and the member in charge. Affordability is fundamentally related to deliverability of the legislation, and Government is very clear that the bill must be fit for purpose. That's why I very much welcome the first amendment in this group, Amendment 15, as lodged by Liz Smith. This amendment seeks to ensure that current approaches to funding residential trips through mixed sources, which includes parental contributions, can continue to operate. And I've spoken with the member in charge about the importance of ensuring that the bill does not detract from existing good practice approaches to provision. This means recognising that currently parental contributions towards the cost of residential trips often form a very important component of the overall funding package that a school or education authority draws together to enable delivery. And this might be alongside funding raised through the Parent Council, central funding from the Education Authority, or specific funding initiatives to target measures aimed at reducing the poverty-related attainment gap, such as PEF funding. Yes?
John Mason.
Yeah, I thank the Minister for giving way. This would obviously reduce the cost to the public purse if this amendment goes through and parents are going to pay part of the cost. Is it her understanding that we need a revised financial memorandum?
Minister.
That's something I'd be happy to discuss with the member in charge going forward. Therefore, Liz Smith and I have established a shared understanding that enabling financial contributions to be sought from parents of pupils who wish to participate in the residential experience is a practical way forward to strengthen both deliverability and affordability of the bill. It's important to say that I do not believe it is the member's intent with this amendment, nor would it be government's position that financial contributions should be applied on a blanket basis or as a standard across all pupils participating in the residential at a particular school or in an education authority area. This would fail to achieve the equity and provision that I believe Liz Smith is seeking to introduce through the bill, and which I fully support. Indeed, I believe that it's reasonable to expect that careful and sensitive consideration would and should be given by the Education Authority or managers of a grant-aided school to determine the appropriateness of seeking a financial contribution in each instance. So for these reasons, I would ask that members vote for Amendment 15. Sorry, was that an intervention? Oh, sorry. Apologies. The Scottish Government considers Liz Smith's Amendment 17 essential to ensuring deliverability and affordability of the bill, and I have been very clear in my discussions with the member in charge to date that the Scottish Government would consider funding for residential outdoor education as part of budget negotiations in partnership with COSLA. This would ensure that all financial pressures, including new statutory duties with financial implications, are considered through COSLA's formal financial governance process. And I hope that the commitments that I've made to date and my work with the member in charge signals my intention to follow this through. In addition, it is my view that including an express statutory duty to fund on Scottish ministers in the bill is unnecessary. There are many examples of legislation that create duties and/or costs on education authorities without a specific duty on ministers to provide funding. So, for example, the Period Products Free Provision Scotland Act 21, which originated as a member's bill, and the statutory duty on education authorities to deliver 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare. Implementation of that former duty was then funded by government, and the sums involved were determined in negotiation with COSLA and local authorities, and we might reasonably expect a similar process to be undertaken here. And I can assure members that if the bill is passed, the Government will work at pace with delivery partners to gather the additional data to inform improved and robust costings, which can then be used to inform those discussions with COSLA. It's worth noting that our ability to do so in an appropriate timeframe will be subject to Amendments 18 and 19 in Group 7 regarding commencement also being agreed to, so we obviously will come back to that later. So I therefore support Amendment 17, and I would ask that members vote for it. Turning to Pam Duncan-Glancy's Amendments 3, 4 and 5, I am supportive of Pam Duncan-Glancy's Amendment 3, which will make clear to local authorities and to families of disabled children and young people who have self-directed support available to them that this funding can be used to support participation in outdoor residential education. It is reasonable to require the guidance issued under the bill to cover this matter. Therefore, I hope members will vote for Amendment 3. I therefore have no issues endorsing Amendment 4, which provides for the definition of self-directed support and accompanies Amendment 3. With respect to Amendment 5, I understand the intention of this amendment, and it is, of course, essential that pupils with additional support needs be appropriately supported to take part in residential outdoor education. However, my view is that we will achieve this aim through the mixed funding arrangements and the approach that already exists, as well as through the consideration with COSLA as part of budget negotiations over the local government settlement, as mentioned in relation to Amendment 17. So on this basis, I would ask that the member not move Amendment 5, but if Amendment 5 is moved, I would encourage members to vote against it, should it not be preempted. Yes.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention, and I welcome the support, particularly for Amendments 3 and 4. And I'm sympathetic to the approach, as I said earlier on, about Amendment 5. Would the member agree with me that it is important to reiterate that pupils with additional support needs and their families shouldn't have to bear the cost of their additional support when they are attending residential outdoor education?
Minister.
Yes, I agree, and this is perhaps something that we can look to addressing further in the guidance, so I'm more than happy to maybe continue conversations around this. But as I've said, the way that it's laid out for Amendment 5 is not appropriate. With respect to Amendment 11, introduced by John Mason, I understand why John has lodged this amendment and his intent in doing so, which would make clear to schools through the statutory guidance that they can make use of pupil equity funding to enable pupils to attend residential visits. And this is in line with the mixed model of funding that's used at present by schools. And I think we all agree wholeheartedly that this approach should continue under this bill. That's why, as I've stated, I support Pam Duncan-Glancy's Amendment 3 to ensure that guidance must cover the funding sources available to support visits. Excuse me. I would view PEF as one such source of this funding. However, we must consider that PEF itself is not underpinned by legislation. Should a future Scottish Government change what PEF is called or how it works in practice, then any reference to it on the face of this bill would potentially become unworkable. But I can commit to the guidance referencing that appropriate additional funding sources provided by the Scottish Government be listed as part of giving effect to Amendment 3. I hope this reassures Mr Mason and that he will now not press his Amendment 11. If he does, I encourage members to vote against it. In terms of Mr Mason's Amendment 12, the first part of the amendment relates to the duty to fund, which Liz Smith's Amendment 17 seeks to remove. Should that amendment be agreed to, then the Amendment 12 cannot be called due to pre-emption. The latter parts of this amendment allow head teachers to allocate a portion of the school's PEF to support residential outdoor education, with the intention to reduce the cost for all pupils or to subsidise the visit for those from lower income families. However, I don't see it as requiring to be set out on the face of the bill for the reasons given already in relation to Mr Mason's Amendment 11. On this basis, should that Amendment 12 be pressed, I would ask again that members vote against it. On to Mr Balfour's amendments 22, 23, 24 and 25. They allow us to debate, I think, a very important set of issues, and I would put on record my thanks to him for lodging them and allowing us to do so. Amendment 22 concerns participation of pupils who have a carer, and I absolutely agree with the principle that where a pupil requires a carer or carers to support their participation in residential outdoor education, they should face no barriers to having a carer or carers attend. But I believe that the most suitable approach to achieving this aim is to address these matters within the guidance that ministers would be required to produce. The bill does already make provision for this approach and requires that residential outdoor education be suitable for any additional support need that a pupil may have. Yes.
Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but would you recognise that guidance doesn't have any legal authority behind it, and that if, for example, for whatever reason, a local authority went against that guidance, because it's guidance, the parent would have no right legally to challenge that?
Minister.
Well, as I've said, I think the bill already makes provision for this. I think addressing the point in the guidance would allow us the time for the government to consult with outdoor education providers, to consult with young people with additional support needs, to consult with parents, carers and other relevant stakeholders. However, I was going to come on to, I appreciate what Mr Balfour says around guidance and enforcing that. I'd be more than happy to have further discussions around this in advance of stage 3. So at the moment, I would ask Mr Balfour not to press Amendment 22, but if he does, I would encourage members to vote against it. As I said, I'm more than happy to have further discussions around that point. Of course, as well, Mr Balfour is right to raise the issue of young carers and the specific barriers they may face in accessing residential outdoor education through Amendment 23. I am slightly concerned here at the potential for overreach into the ambit of health and social care, as this could create some unhelpful ambiguity around responsibility for delivery as well as budgetary responsibility. I do also think that the needs and interests of young carers, as pupils with additional support needs would already be covered by the provisions on guidance. And moreover, I return to our position on Liz Smith's amendments 17 and 18 and the government's preference to remove the general duty to fund from the bill. So it would be inconsistent to replace that with specific duties in relation to children and young people with specific needs and interests. Nevertheless, I am willing to give this more consideration ahead of stage 3. Therefore, ask the member not to press Amendment 23, and if he does, I would encourage members to vote against it. Yes.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention, and again, as I've said, I'm sympathetic to the approach in terms of the amendments from Liz Smith for the funding of the provisions in the bill overall. And I also understand the Minister's point that it does reach into health and social care and education. But I think it's probably worth just putting on the record, and I welcome the commitment to work on this at stage 3, and perhaps this can be included in it. It's often between those cracks that the experience of young carers, or indeed disabled people or pupils with additional support needs, fall. And so there probably does need to, at the very least, be a significant chunk of guidance identifying this, because members of staff in schools can't be expected to also understand the realms of health and social care without some guidance. And also health and social care teams can't be expected to understand responsibilities of particular piece of legislation in education. Now, in an ideal world, I'm sure everybody would, right? But the reality is these are all quite complex. And so I think it probably is worth noting that this will need to be addressed, if not on the face of the bill, through negotiations between now and stage 3, at the very least in guidance. Could the Minister comment on whether or not she thinks that would be possible?
Minister.
I agree with much of what Ms Duncan-Glancy has said, and as I've committed to, I'm more than happy to discuss this further, whether that is something... I don't have the answer at the moment in terms of how we tackle some of the problems that the member brings to me, but as I've said, I am happy to make that commitment to work further on this to try to ensure that those young people don't lose out. So I would ask the member not to press Amendment 23, and if he does, I encourage members to vote against it. I put on record my commitment in terms of discussing that further. Jeremy Balfour's Amendment 24 seeks to ensure that the amount provided to grant-aided schools for the purposes of this bill must be in addition to their core grant funding. It would further bar the managers of grant-aided schools from using any other funding to meet the duties of the bill. Again, I appreciate the member's intention here, which is to ensure that additionality in funding and to ensure that day-to-day education provision in grant-aided schools is not impacted, but it would directly prevent mixed funding approaches to be used by a grant-aided school to support provision under the bill. And I think that's particularly important given that education authorities also provide funding for individual pupil places at grant-aided schools, and those schools which are run by a charity often create specific fundraising initiatives to augment their provision at these schools. And again, I'll return to the case made in favour of Liz Smith's Amendment 17, which I think is also relevant here. So for all these reasons, I ask Jeremy Balfour not to press Amendment 24. If he does, and it's not preempted, I encourage members to vote against it. I'm sure the committee will be happy to hear. I'm now turning to the last amendment in this group, Jeremy Balfour's Amendment 25. I recognise and share the member's desire to make sure the bill expands access to residential outdoor education to all those who face barriers in participation. And I'm aware that disabled children can face additional barriers. Indeed, the needs and circumstances of disabled young people can be multiple, can be complex and highly individual. But not all disabled children and young people are entitled to or claim child disability payment, and indeed might be in receipt of other relevant benefits, some of which are not necessarily devolved. So I feel like slightly counterintuitive to seek to remove the duty to fund in general to replace it with specific duties to fund. But I am again happy to ensure Jeremy Balfour that the needs and interests of disabled children and their families and their ability to participate in residential outdoor education will feature in those discussions with COSLA as part of the nuanced considerations needed to implement the bill. I would therefore ask him not to press Amendment 25. If he does, I would encourage members to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Liz Smith to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 15. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, and can I thank all members for their contribution in this. This is an important group, not least because of the content of Amendments 15 and 17, which I think have addressed some of the most significant concerns that members have had throughout the passage of this bill to date. I'm very grateful to the commitments that the Minister has made on the record, because we've had quite a lot of back and forth about what these commitments should be in terms of not having any dilution of the bill. So I'm grateful to the Minister for that. Over the course of the summer, I think members are very aware that I spent a lot of my time visiting several of our outdoor education centres. And the one thing that has struck in my mind very forcibly is the importance of what we provide for those with additional support needs. So I'm very grateful to Pam Duncan-Glancy and to Jeremy Balfour for the work that they have done on this. I believe very, very strongly, actually, that there is a determination in the sector and amongst teachers to be as inclusive as possible when it comes to the provision of residential outdoor education. And I was very struck by several centres who have done a huge amount in terms of their capital development and the facilities that they provide, and some of the equipment is necessary to make the provision for additional support. So that's been very much at the heart of this bill for me. It has to be an inclusive bill, and it has to provide the opportunities for all young people, no matter who they are. And I entirely accept some of the points that Jeremy Balfour has made in that respect. So I look forward to further engagement in the course of the lead up to stage 3, and I'm very grateful to the Minister for her commitments.
Thank you.
And
you
press 15.
You are pressing 15, so the question is that Amendment 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That's agreed. I call Amendment 28 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 21. Pam Duncan-Glancy to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 3 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 15. Pam Duncan-Glancy to move or not move? Amendment 3.
Move.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 11 in the name of John Mason, already debated with Amendment 15. John Mason to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 20 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, grouped with Amendments 16 and 21.
Oh,
sorry, I'm just...
Sorry.
No, we were here.
Oh, right.
Yeah. We okay? Just...
Yeah, he's not moved.
So that wasn't moved, therefore I moved to the next debate on the groupings.
Yeah, you were asking about questions.
Okay. I call Amendment 20 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, grouped with Amendments 16 and 21. Jeremy Balfour to move Amendment 20 and speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Convener. Amendment 21 seeks to establish specific guidance for special schools regarding the age groups, year groups, which they can consider suitable for outdoor education within their own framework. Amendment 20 simply adds a line to confirm that guidance must be adapted as appropriate to reflect the specific needs of pupils enrolled at a special school. Can I put on the record my thanks to both the Harmony School here in Edinburgh and Donaldson's Trust School, which I think some of the committee visited last week within my region, both who have met with me and have helped me draft these two particular amendments. They both have concerns regarding how the bill could be worked within their own specific context. Special schools are a distinct category of school, as defined in the Education Additional Support for Learning Scotland Act 2004. I won't read that to you, but I'm sure you are aware. According to Scottish Government data, there are 8,002 pupils enrolled in special schools across Scotland at the moment. Can I absolutely make clear that these amendments are aimed only at these schools? They do not apply to mainstream schools, but they do recognise that children with additional needs may not be able to fit in to the framework or age groups or year groups that other children do who are at mainstream schools. So, for example, Donaldson's Trust was outlining that for some of their children, it would be totally inappropriate for them to have to go away to do that, and certainly at the ages that other children would. And that actually the outdoor learning could be provided within the school, but in a different way that would be provided for others. I think this recognises the commitment that everybody has, I think, that we want to see every child access outdoor learning, but how that happens and at what age that happens, then that needs to be looked at, particularly for those with special needs. So I hope that the committee will recognise this, will see this as strengthening children's rights, and I hope we'll move Amendment 20 and 21.
Thank you very much. I call Liz Smith to speak to Amendment 16 and other amendments in the group. Ms Smith.
First of all, can I thank Jeremy Balfour for these amendments. I entirely agree with him about the principles behind it. I too had spoken to the Donaldson Trust and very impressed by what they say. And you're absolutely right to identify that there are very specific issues there that don't necessarily apply in other schools. And I think it's also right to point out at this stage that there are youngsters who, for one reason or another, are simply not able to take up the opportunity of going on residential activities. I think it's important that managers of special schools are able to deliver the discrete education that is required, and therefore we have to ensure that whatever the bill ends up with it is appropriate to all schools, no matter what their designation. The new section 6B7 which would be inserted into the Education Scotland Act that Jeremy Balfour referred to, it would require Scottish ministers to consult with the managers of each grant-aided school before preparing the guidance or revised guidance. Therefore, there is already an opportunity for that to happen and feed into that guidance. So I'm not entirely persuaded that we need to have this on the face of the bill, but as I indicated before, I have absolutely no objection to the intention behind these amendments. I look forward to hearing the Minister's remark in that regard. Turning to my own Amendment 16, this came about because of some of the original evidence that we took away back in stage 1 about education in the Gaelic community. Currently inserted section 6B4H provides that guidance that the Scottish ministers must issue to education authorities and the managers of grant-aided schools must include provision for the extent to which education authorities and managers of the grant-aided schools should consider providing or securing the provision of residential outdoor education in Gaelic. Amendment 16 has been lodged following representations to myself and the Minister about outdoor education from the Gaelic community. That amendment tailors the provision to cover pupils who will receive education in the Gaelic medium rather than pupils in all schools. And it also... Of course.
Jeremy Balfour.
I'm grateful to the member, and I apologise that this only came to my attention last night, so I haven't had an opportunity to speak to her. But a number of people from the deaf community have approached me around this amendment. They are supportive of the Gaelic language, but they are also wondering whether some provision should be also made for those that use BSL, and that could be something that could be looked at stage 3. And I just wonder whether the member would be open in principle to looking at making sure, if we're choosing Gaelic, then also looking at BSL, which is recognised as another language.
I think the member makes a very good point. As I understand other parliamentary business in Holyrood just now, there are policies in place to try to look at this whole issue about ensuring that there is a parity of esteem within different languages. So I think we can discuss that further before stage 3. And with that, Convener, I move Amendment 16.
Thank you. And I call the Minister.
Thanks, Convener. I thank Jeremy Balfour for laying his amendments 20 and 21 and very much appreciate and value the member's concern to ensure that residential outdoor education meets the needs of pupils attending special schools. The statutory guidance will be important in supporting the implementation, so I do understand the desire to specify matters that the guidance will have to cover. It would seem to me that Amendments 20 and 21 seek to ensure that provision included in the statutory guidance about the year group of pupils to whom a course of residential outdoor education should be provided should reflect the arrangements of classes and year groups in special schools, which understandably may be different from the arrangements in mainstream schools. The amendments would also require regard to be had to the specific needs of pupils attending special schools. So I would contend that Section 6B(4)(c) already allows for this to happen, and that the guidance must provide for assessment by education authorities of the suitability of outdoor education in terms of age, ability, aptitude and any other additional support needs. This implies inclusion of the needs of children and young people attending special schools, so I don't consider amendments 20 and 21 to be necessary. However, again, I would be happy to discuss the intention behind these amendments with Mr Balfour ahead of stage 3 to determine if there might be something that could be usefully be added to the provisions on the guidance, perhaps in relation to consultation or engagement, including pupils who attend special schools, to really understand those specific needs. So I would hope he will therefore not press amendments 20 and 21. If he does, I would encourage members to vote against them. Finally, I welcome Liz Smith's Amendment 16, which provides greater clarity relating to what the statutory guidance must include on Gaelic medium education. This follows discussions with Liz Smith on how we might strengthen that provision. So from the 30th of November, when the relevant provisions come into force, the Scottish Languages Act 2025 will amend the Education Scotland Act 2016 to require education authorities to promote, to facilitate and support Gaelic medium education and have regard to the needs and interests of all pupils who are receiving such education. And it will also amend the definition of school education in the Education Scotland 1980 Act to clarify that school education includes Gaelic learner education and Gaelic medium education. So as such, I believe that there is little room for ambiguity, that residential outdoor education should be provided in Gaelic for those pupils receiving Gaelic medium education. Liz Smith's amendment therefore strengthens and clarifies how the statutory guidance stemming from this bill will align with existing statutory duties around the Gaelic language and Gaelic medium education. So for these reasons, I would ask members to vote for Amendment 16.
Thank you. I call Jeremy Balfour to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 20. Mr Balfour.
Thank you. Convener, it will come no surprise to this committee I'm not a great fan of guidance. I think it has its place, but I do worry that too often we put things into guidance and then forget about it, and it leaves parents, it leaves others in a position where actually they have no statutory authority to be able to enforce something. I won't labour the point, but we are future-proofing this bill for when we may have governments or local authorities that aren't supportive of this in principle, and there needs to be some kind of backstop for parents and for young folk to have these enforced. Having said that, I won't push Amendments 20 and 21 today, but will take up the offer of both Liz Smith and from the Minister to engage with them. As I said, I welcome Amendment 16 in the name of Liz Smith. I do think we should maybe have a look at whether we can strengthen it slightly more. I also be interested to know how it would work in practice, where you have a school like Gillespie's here in Edinburgh, which has a number of pupils who are doing Gaelic, but the main school are doing English. Are you going to do it bilingually? But again, no doubt that will all be set out in guidance in due course. And with that, I seek leave of the committee to withdraw Amendment 20.
Thank you very much. Jeremy Balfour seeks to withdraw Amendment 20. Does any member object? No member objects, so Amendment 20 is withdrawn. I call Amendment 16 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 20. Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 4 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 15. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 21 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 20. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move?
Not move.
I call Amendment 29 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 1. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Can I just check we are agreed? Yes. I call Amendment 30 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 1. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 30 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 17 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 15. Sorry, I call Amendment 17 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 15. I remind members that if Amendment 17 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendments 5, 12, 22, 23 and 24 due to a pre-emption. Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 25 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 15. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move? Amendment 25.
Don't move.
I call Amendment 6 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 1. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Not move.
I call Amendment 7 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 1. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move or not move?
Not moved.
The question is that Section 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 8 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, group with Amendments 9 and 10. Pam Duncan-Glancy, to move Amendment 8 and speak to all amendments in the group. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. Amendment 8 requires ministers to report on the Act and on additional support needs. It says that we should consider the numbers, the provision, the access, the support needed, the cost of it and how they were met. I think this is important for us to understand the implementation of outdoor residential education, in particular, given that it is clearly the Parliament's intent, to this point at the very least, that all young people will be able to access it. And I think that gathering data on that will help us do so, and also reporting on the way in which it's done, including the sorts of funds that are used, the sorts of costs involved, will all be really helpful for schools going forward, but also for the implementation of the Act, should it pass at stage 3, which I'm confident, hope it does. But should it pass at stage 3, I think this information will be really important so that we can monitor how it happens. It's also helpful through reporting mechanisms such as this, so that schools can see how others are supporting young people with additional support needs. And so I think it could be providing useful information as, for schools to learn by and implement, as well as monitoring purposes. Amendment 9 requires a report on protected characteristics, so it's slightly broader than just ASN, including as well socio-economic status. I think that's also important given the comments we've heard on the record today around the importance of socio-economic status not being a barrier to young people accessing residential outdoor education. Yes.
John Mason.
I just wonder if she can indicate how much detail she thinks both of these amendments would go into. I mean, the support provided to pupils in 8(2)D, would it be every single pupil and there would be details of exactly what happened? And again with 9(2)C, you know, how much detail in this? Because every individual person might be different.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the member for that intervention, and the member is of course right. I don't intend that this would be granular to the extent where, for example, we could identify anyone, because I think that would be very important that it wasn't the case. But I think the intention here is to get a flavour of how the bill is working, who's accessing it, who's accessing the rights within it, and how they're accessing those rights within it. So I appreciate that, as drafted, the amendments are quite detailed, because they highlight all of the sorts of things that I think would be important for us to gather information on. I'm prepared to consider whether or not reporting and reviewing amendments could be amended for stage 3 if members think that the intention behind these are important, but that the level of detail could be prohibitive on a piece of legislation. But nonetheless, I think it is important for us to understand who's participating, the models that are being used by education authorities to encourage and support that participation, the numbers in general. I think we've heard that data is lacking in certain areas, and so it would be important to get that. The costs, I think, are important for us to understand. So too are the ways that schools and education authorities are meeting those. There could be some particularly imaginative routes to doing so, and I wouldn't be against that. I think it's important that we understand all of this. So that's why the amendments are drafted as such, but I certainly wouldn't want it to be down to granular level detail that could identify even schools, to be honest, because I don't want league tables in this. It's more about how are we doing on this, where are the examples of good practice, and how can we improve on it if necessary. And so those, I think I got as far as 8 and 9. Amendment 10 just requires that ministers consider these reports and review the operation of the Act to ensure that all children and young people in Scotland have equal access to positive and creative outdoor learning experiences, which throughout stage 1 and indeed as today has progressed, I think is the intention of all the members. Thank you.
And can you move Amendment 8?
Forgive me, yes, I'd move Amendment 8, please.
Thank you very much. Call the Minister.
Thank you, Convener. The amendments in this group all relate to undertaking reviews and reporting on the provision of residential outdoor education, including equity The bill, as introduced, does not include provisions relating to monitoring or evaluation of delivery. As such, I recognise the positive intent of Pam Duncan-Glancy in lodging these amendments and the importance in monitoring going forward. But there are some challenges presented by these amendments in their current form. Amendment 8 seeks to impose a requirement on Scottish ministers to report on equal access to residential outdoor education provided under the bill, in particular in relation to pupils with additional support needs. I do agree that it will be important to monitor the uptake of visits to residential outdoor education centres with a particular lens on equity. However, the way the amendment is currently framed, stipulating that this report should be produced within 12 months of the date of royal assent, I don't think would be workable. If commencement occurs in July following royal assent, as envisaged in the bill at introduction, this would likely mean that the report would be required. The report required by Amendment 8 would be produced within just a few months of the substantive provisions coming into force. And I think it's quite unlikely that the system would be in a position to make good on the new statutory duty to provide, to an extent, any useful data for a report by that point. Amendment 9 seeks to ensure ministers produce a report on uptake of provision of residential outdoor education by pupils who may otherwise face barriers as soon as reasonably practical after commencement, and the lack of clarity there on timescales of reporting creates challenges. Amendment 10 seeks to ensure that ministers undertake a review within 5 years after royal assent to determine the overall impacts of the legislation, again in particular as related to improving equity and provision and access to residential experiences as reported on under Amendments 8 and 9. Again, as with Amendment 8, I have some difficulties with the time periods that are set for the reporting requirements. The Government's preference is for the legislation to be commenced via regulations, as per Liz Smith's Amendments 18 and 19. Those regulations, which would require to be made by September 2027, would appoint a suitable commencement date. And the timescales set out in Amendment 10 would mean a review carried out, again, a short time after commencement or a few years after commencement. And again, I think that presents some challenges. So while I agree with the intent behind Amendment 10, I think a more constructive review period would be 5 years after the commencement of the Act. I think that would allow us better data. So in conclusion, while I'm recommending that members don't vote for these amendments at stage 2, I'm supportive of the ultimate purpose behind them, and I'm happy to commit to bringing back suitable amendments at stage 3 on reporting. So I hope Pam Duncan-Glancy won't press those amendments 8, 9 and 10, and if she does, I would encourage members to vote against them.
I call Liz Smith.
Thank you. I very much support the intention behind Pam Duncan-Glancy's amendments, because they broadly chime with the intent on the bill itself. I agree with the Minister, however. I do think there are some timing issues about this. I think there's a technical timing issue as to how Amendment 8 sits alongside my own amendment to change the arrangements for commencement. It provides for the report to be published within the 12 months of the royal assent, as the Minister set out. And if my bill is to pass at stage 3 in December or January, whenever, the royal assent would probably be February or March of the next year. And that means that the report provided for in Amendment 8 would need to be published before February and March in 2027. So there's a technical difficulty in doing that. However, the Minister said that it's a debating point for stage 3, and I'm happy to go along with that. I do think it's very difficult to place a requirement to report on children with protected characteristics, because I think you can get into too much detail in that respect. You've got to be careful about the Equality Act in 2010, because there's a complexity in there. In fact, there's a distinct possibility that might not be the information held by the school or the education authority, and that's a concern. So I'm slightly concerned about the level of the data that amendment is asking for just now. But can I just flag up that one of the things that we debated when it was the schools bill was about, and there was an amendment passed in Parliament, which I put forward to suggest that HMIE should inspect extracurricular, but residential outdoor education included within that. So I think that's an important aspect of extra check, if you like, on what's happening in residential outdoor education. So that's another reason why I think we probably tighten up in this area, but I would ask the member to think about not moving these until we iron out some of the timing details. And finally, can I thank Pam Duncan-Glancy for Amendment 10. In principle, that's an amendment with which I agree. I think introducing a review provision to consider the operation of the Act 5 years after it's delivered is sensible and prudent. There's perhaps a question about whether that review could be directly aligned with two sets of reporting requirements, in particular, given different time frames set out. But I understand where she's coming from, and I think the Minister is going to further discussions about this before stage 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Pam Duncan-Glancy to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 8. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. I fully take on board the points about the timescales, in particular in terms of royal assent versus commencement date, which I think are issues with particularly Amendment 8 and 10. And so I'm happy not to press them at this stage and to work with the Government and the member in charge on a tighter amendment to do this with the same intent, which is, of course, to review the operation and to make sure that it is delivering for the pupils that and young people that we all expected it to. In terms of level Amendment 9, I'm happy not to press that at this point as well, given, again, some of the timescales involved. I take the point that the member puts forward about the Equality Act and whether or not the schools hold the data. I think that's worth us exploring between now and stage 3. I think it's important that we do understand the impact of any legislation on protected characteristics, and there are, of course, equality impact assessments that are intended to do that. So I think it's probably worth a conversation on the technicalities in that space to see what we can do at stage 3, and on that basis, I'm prepared not to move any of the amendments in that group.
Thank you very much. Pam Duncan-Glancy seeks to withdraw Amendment 8. Does any member object? No member objects, so Amendment 8 is withdrawn. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 8. Pam Duncan-Glancy to move or not move?
Not move.
I call Amendment 10 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy, already debated with Amendment 8. Pam Duncan-Glancy to move or not move?
Not move.
I call Amendment 26 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, group with Amendment 27. Jeremy Balfour to move Amendment 26 and speak to both amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you again, Convener. This Amendment 26 seeks to ensure a review of all outdoor residential facilities is carried out with 1 year of this bill receiving royal assent. I've had the privilege over the last few years, for different reasons, to visit a number of outdoor education centres, and they all do an absolutely excellent job. But I do have some concerns that the current facilities as are there would not meet the standard to meet the diverse needs of pupils who will be attending these residential camps. For example, there may be a lack of equipment, such as hoists to get in and out of the water, off-road wheelchairs, suitable changing facilities, adapted beds, and other equipment that would be required. And again, as has been the common theme throughout this morning, we all want every child to access that. But again, if the appropriate equipment is not there, that could be something that would stop that happening. So this amendment is specific to assess for complex care needs and for disability needs. The review would allow Scottish ministers to get a clear picture of the residential outdoor facility estate across Scotland to ensure that all children are able to take part safely, equally and without any barriers to inclusion. It would then give them an opportunity to have discussions with those outdoor centres, with local authorities, with others, to see what needed to be done to make sure, as the number of children go to these places, the appropriate equipment is there. Amendment 27 follows on from 26, and that is in regard to change-in-place toilets. If you don't know what a change-in-place toilet is, if you go to reception here in the Parliament, you will see one, and you will see how different it is from what an accessible toilet is compared to a change-in-place toilet. And there is still, I think, confusion within society generally that every accessible toilet is a change-in-place toilet, and that is not the situation. I would.
I thank the member for taking that intervention, and I think it's really important to point out the differences in those toilets. It's also important to say that most people assume that toilets are something that are available to disabled people, and they're not always, and so it is worth always reiterating that point. I'm very sympathetic to the member's amendment in this space. Can I just ask about the 2 years and whether or not the member thinks that will be enough time?
Jeremy Balfour.
Well, firstly, thanks to the member for her positive comments. As in everything, I am open to persuasion of whether 2 years is needing longer, and I look forward to hearing from what Liz Smith and the Minister has to say. I think if we could get the principle agreed today, I'm very happy to come back at stage 3 with a slightly different timescale, if that is what the majority feel is the way forward. For those that don't know, a change in place toilets includes a hoist, a room for a carer to be in attendance, doorway suitable, and for a shower. I have campaigned long for change in place toilets to be more readily available. I'm pleased that in the previous Parliament we got an amendment passed in regard to the planning and how they now have to be part of certain new developments. I'm very grateful for the Scottish Government have opened a £10 million fund available to organisations to help fund the installation of change-in-place toilets, because I do recognise they come at an extra cost. Again, without a change-in-place toilet in place in an outdoor centre, it will undoubtedly stop some young people from going. So whether it's 2 years or 5 years or hopefully no more than that, or somewhere in between that, I do think this is something we should be encouraging outdoor centres to go ahead and get as soon as possible and set a deadline for it. And also, I think I would encourage, if I can bid at this moment for government money, that the change in place scheme remains open, not just this year, but new money can be put in future years. Thank you.
Can you move Amendment 26?
Oh, I can move Amendment 26 with pleasure.
Thank you very much. Call the Minister.
I thank Jeremy Balfour for laying Amendments 26 and 27 and facilitating debate at this stage on these matters. Both amendments relate to assessing and improving residential outdoor education facilities to meet the needs of pupils with additional support needs, in particular those with complex care needs and disabilities. And Mr Balfour will be aware, through previous scrutiny of this bill, this is something that, has been highlighted by myself and by other members regularly. So I again say thank you for facilitating this debate at this stage. So I really do, welcome and understand the principle behind these amendments, but I don't necessarily believe that legislation is the appropriate way to address these issues. With respect to Amendment 26, the member is seeking to require ministers to undertake a review of residential outdoor education facilities used to make provision under Section 6A of the Bill, with specific focus given to understanding capacity of existing facilities to meet the needs of pupils with complex care needs or a disability. And as I've said, I fully appreciate the member's concern here. But there are some important challenges with the way that the amendment itself is framed. It does not provide a clear definition of what is meant by complex care needs and relies on an approach of diagnosis, but this might exclude pupils who are currently in the process of seeking such or for whom a diagnosis is not straightforward. A further technical issue is that, assuming that amendments relating to commencement succeed, there wouldn't the timings around that again don't necessarily work. There wouldn't necessarily be any facilities used to provide residential outdoor education under Section 6A within 12 months of royal assent. So it would be unclear what facilities would be within scope of that review. The timescale for the review to have taken place is therefore, it's not realistic. Similar to the points that I raised around Amendment 8 concerning the reporting, I don't think it's pragmatic to undertake a review tied to provision under the Act at such an early stage. But as we're about to discuss when we get to Group 7, my view is that a more appropriate approach would be to amend the bill to bring its provisions in force by commencement regulations, as detailed in the amendments proposed by Liz Smith, In this scenario, Government would give careful consideration to how best system readiness to respond to the demands of the Act could be established in a timely manner, and including with regards to ensuring access for pupils with additional support needs. I know that's something that's already been a topic of conversation between myself and the Member in Charge's discussions with some of those centres. So as part of this work, we would work collaboratively with the sector to seek input from education professionals working in special schools, parents and carers of young people with additional support needs, third sector organisations working with disabled young people, and, vitally, from children and young people with additional support needs themselves. This engagement would be essential to understanding what it means for a residential outdoor education facility to be suitable for their needs. I would therefore hope that this assures Mr Balfour and that he will not press his amendment, but if he does, I would encourage members to vote against it. Amendment 27 would create a statutory duty upon owners of a residential outdoor education facility to ensure that their facility provides at least one changing places toilet within 2 years of royal assent. And again, while I understand the reasoning behind this, there are inherent difficulties. Standards for which buildings require a changing places toilet are set out in planning regulations. Many, possibly most, residential outdoor education facilities don't fall under the regulatory criteria set for requiring changing places toilets. But, nonetheless, as Mr Balfour mentioned, this Government has championed and supported the rollout of changing places in appropriate public settings, including that £10 million Changing Places Toilets Fund. So I therefore support the intent behind Mr Balfour's amendment.
Miles Briggs.
One of the, I think, really interesting points which the committee, when we visited these centres, has been they are from the 1940s being built, Education Act 1944-45 passed in Scotland. And that was really the last time we've seen that real focus on significant investment. So this bill hopefully presents that opportunity for us to have that reset, but in very different circumstances in terms of the sorts of facilities we would expect. And so I just wondered what work will then commence working with these centres, which are often private or charitable organisations as well, to see what that investment actually will look like over that period. Because it's something I hope anyway, this will present additional funds to these centres, but also for them as a business model to actually also have other groups coming in using them, and that would actually create more cash flow for them to really invest in their facilities going forward as well. Minister.
I mean, I would make a commitment that this will be part of the discussions going forward in terms of assessing system readiness and capacity. It certainly would be with my discussions in terms of those centres. I've repeatedly said that I think a key part of the deliverability of this bill is ensuring that centres are properly equipped for all pupils, especially those with disabilities or complex needs. So I think some of this kind of touches on the next grouping in terms of commencement and really understanding where we currently are and where we need to get to in ensuring equity for all pupils in Scotland. Sorry, as I was just about to get on to, as I fully support the intent behind Mr Balfour's amendment, and I think I'd be happy to undertake to explore how we provide for this in the statutory guidance, but also take Mr Briggs' point around assessing and the discussion going forward with the centres and capacity. So I hope this reassures Mr Balfour and he will not press Amendment 27, but if he does, I would encourage members to vote against it.
Thank you. I call Liz Smith.
Thank you. Again, an interesting debate. I absolutely support the intention behind these amendments, because I think it's very important that we are making the provision wherever it is necessary. And it's not just about centres, it's about youth hostels, it might be about sailing boats, it might be about a variety of different areas where we have to make the provision. To Mr Briggs' point, which is a very valid one, that a lot of our centres were built quite a long time ago. I think one of the really good things that has been happening in the outdoor sector just now is that there is a sort of audit taking place of what they do have, what they don't have and what they should have. There are some fantastic new centres that have had completely refurbished with full access for ASN disability youngsters with their carers as well. And the equipment, certainly from a couple that I visited in the summer, huge improvement in the equipment that is available to help people with hoists or whatever that might be, and that's very good to see. And I think within the outdoor sector there's a lot of work being undertaken just now through the quality improvement framework, I think it's called, to try to ensure that there is, that is understood that there has to be much better provision due to the fact that some of these facilities are old. And we do know of sources of additional money that have already been put in to help with the provision of some of that facility and kit. And I know that the Minister has a forthcoming meeting with a group who's very interested to provide a little extra money, and that comes back to the earlier debate we had about not just having one source of funding. So I absolutely understand where Mr Balfour is coming from on this, but yes, of course.
Miles Briggs. Can I firstly congratulate the member for the work she's done on the bill, also being the first MSP to congratulate Steve Clark and the national team. I think we're having email after email. I thought the convener would be the first.
I had a registered interest, so I wasn't allowed.
But I think it's really important because over the last 10 years we have seen the loss of a lot of these facilities, and so many are telling us they're under threat. So I just wondered, in terms of local authorities who still have ownership of these properties, where a future capital assessment will take place. And the Minister's outlined, I think, some of what that would look like, but how the member envisages that to be captured in terms of future investment needed.
No. Thank you for that intervention. Can I credit the Scottish Government, because at one time during COVID we would have had even fewer centres if the Government hadn't stepped up with £3 million additional funds to ensure that we were able to keep some of our centres going. But we have lost a lot, and that there are concerns about some of these ones being in an older generation. One of the benefits of the bill will be that the demand will increase, and therefore, I think there is scope for further development. If you look at some of the outdoor centres that we have around Scotland just now, there is a very considerable increase in the demand for some of these new centres because of the nature of the excellent facilities that they provide. And I think there's a lot of interesting data that we should be collecting on exactly what is available. And if you go into some of the statistics which tell you which different centres have got and the kinds of schools that are using them, but also the age groups that are using them, I think there's some really important data there. And that's something that I think we need to take forward beyond whether the bill passes or not, because it's important data that we need to ensure that the outdoor sector has that quality appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Jeremy Balfour to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 26. Mr Balfour.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Just briefly in regard to Amendment 26, I didn't fully understand, I have to confess, the first point made by the Minister. These centres wouldn't be looking at particular children's needs, they would be doing a whole review around that. I also think we have to recognise that the equipment that I mentioned in my earlier statement does not come cheaply, and this will require a major financial investment. And to expect some of the smaller education facilities to be able to pick that up quickly will be difficult. And that's why I think to be able to have an overall review and then see where the funding is going to be required would be helpful.
Would the member take an intervention on that point?
Absolutely.
Minister.
I think, and it's really just a suggestion from me, but I think that's why the coming months in terms of the review and the data that needs to be gathered is going to be very important. And equally, the approach that we're going to take, I've previously discussed with the member in charge the potential for leveraging private funding, for example, in terms of looking at the estate. Now, I'm not saying that that would be the proposed approach, but I'm just saying that there are options out there, because I appreciate what Mr Balfour says around, that would be quite a hefty investment required. So I think really just trying to emphasise the importance of the work that's going to take place in the coming months to establish a route forward.
Jeremy Balfour.
Yeah, can I thank the Minister for her intervention? I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I suppose what I'm meant trying to say is, post-fact, once we've done all the work, once the bill is up and running, it's good then to go back and look again to see we've identified X, Y and Z as needs. Are those actually being identified? Because if I'm, and you know, I don't like to be too sceptical, but this feels a bit like my golf, that this is going into the long grass, and that what we are looking at here is something that is going to be very difficult to deliver, possibly even within my lifetime. I do accept, yeah.
Liz Smith.
I think the member is raising, quite rightly raising concerns. I do think that there is a very strong support for joint approaches between the public and private sectors in this respect. And that's a commitment that the Scottish Government has already provided in other areas, whether it comes to infrastructure development or whatever. I think that's important, and there is, in my mind, there is no question that the private sector facilities can offer some of the things that you quite rightly are asking for. So I think there's scope to develop that collaboration between the two sectors. Would the member accept that?
Jeremy Balfour.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely accept and do hope that. I also do acknowledge that my timing with the different amendments that will follow post this does make the timing, so I won't be pushing Amendment 26 today, but I would think that some further conversations, perhaps before stage 3, would be helpful. In regard to Amendment 27, I do think we need to find a way that change-in-place toilets are there. I do accept the point made by Pam Duncan-Glancy that 2 years may be a bit tight in regard to that. So again, I will not be moving this today, but I will be looking to bring something back at stage 3 to make sure that that is doing. Committee, can I just say that these are my last 2 amendments. I will be departing. Not I'm off in my hub, but I do have another meeting to go. So please accept my apologies after moving this. But I would seek your permission to withdraw Amendment 26.
Thank you very much. Jeremy Balfour seeks to withdraw Amendment 26. Does any member object? No member objects. Amendment 26 is withdrawn. I call Amendment 27 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 26. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move? The question is that sections 2 and 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. I call Amendment 18 in the name of Liz Smith, grouped with Amendment 19. Liz Smith to move Amendment 18 and speak both amendments in the group.
I move Amendment 18, and while this is an important section, I'll be relatively brief. This is about the commencement of the bill, and as members are well aware, originally I would have liked this bill, had it passed, to start in next summer. But I recognise from the issues that were being brought through the various stages of the bill so far that that was impractical. So, following discussions with the Minister and other delivery partners, I've accepted that that was too soon. And it's vitally important, if the bill does pass, that it is implemented effectively and thoroughly, and that all participants, whether that's the government, education authorities, managers of grant-aided schools and managers of all the outdoor facilities, are ready and prepared to deliver on the duty effectively. Therefore, the Amendment 18 removes the date of the 7th of July from the face of the bill and replaces it with a commencement by regulations made by Scottish ministers. However, in order to ensure that there is no slippage, i.e. that the bill couldn't just disappear, that the removal of that commencement date from the face of the bill is used effectively, as in it's not going to have any delay implementation. Amendment 19 requires regulations to be made no later than the 30th of September 2027. As I stated in my letter to the Minister of last week, I would welcome her commitment on the bill that will nonetheless be commenced as soon as is reasonably practical after the Royal Assent, and I know that the Minister and officials are working on the checkpoints for delivery in the lead up to that commencement, and I very much welcome that. It's my view that the bill ought to be able to be fully enforced no later than July 2028, in time for the start of the 2028-29 school year, and that represents 2 full years after the date that was currently on the bill. I recognise that the Minister has not wanted to specify a date now, but assurance that the Scottish Government is working at pace towards the earliest possible implementation is something that I would very much welcome. So I welcome engagement on those amendments and all the amendments that we've debated today from the Minister and officials, from the outdoor sector, from representatives of local authorities and trade unions, from representatives of local authority and granted aid schools, as well as from members around this table. I greatly appreciate the scrutiny, engagement in the process and the huge amount of help that we've had from officials.
Thank you. I
And I move
Minister.
Amendment 18.
Thank you. I call the Minister.
Thanks, Convener. Commencement, which is the focus of Group 7, is a key point that myself and the member in charge have discussed in very great detail in recent weeks as we've worked to consider an appropriate approach to amendments. I'm very clear that the timing of commencement must be informed by clear and robust evidence and demonstration of system readiness to meet the demands of the bill. Without this assurance in place, commencement risks undermining deliverability and the impact of the legislation itself. Early feedback from key delivery partners, including COSLA and representatives of the residential outdoor education sector, highlights that it is currently challenging to robustly estimate a realistic timeframe for commencement, as this is dependent on a number of factors, which we'll need to work to clarify with stakeholders as part of implementation planning. Some of these challenges we have discussed at committee this morning. So, fixing a date for commencement on the face of the bill would lead to increased risks for education authorities and managers of grant-aided schools if they're unable to meet their statutory duty to provide residential outdoor education under the bill. The Scottish Government's general position on commencement of legislation is that it should be done through regulations. Scottish ministers must have control over how and when commencement takes place to ensure implementation of legislation is meaningful. Amendment 18 achieves this aim, though it would also be subject to Amendment 19, which I'll come on to in a moment. Liz Smith and I have also discussed the importance of government producing a tangible delivery plan that seeks to drive progress against key checkpoints to ensure that system readiness for commencement is established in a timely manner and a transparent way. I can confirm that should Amendment 18 be accepted, the Government will commit to producing and publishing a delivery plan to ensure commencement can take effect as soon as reasonably practicable after royal assent. I would anticipate this plan to cover a range of outstanding issues that must be appropriately and fully explored and, where possible, addressed. Again, some of these that the committee have touched on this morning. For example, it would be necessary to establish a baseline of current provision, the capacity of the outdoor sector to meet new demand, teacher workforce implications, funding requirements and potential sources, and put in place appropriate monitoring arrangements to ensure delivery over time. So for these reasons, Government supports Amendment 18, and I would encourage members to vote for it. Liz Smith and I have also discussed what other approaches might help to drive progress towards commencement in the absence of a firm date on the face of the bill. Therefore, Amendment 19 requires that commencement regulations are made by the 30th of September 2027 and is, I suggest, a meaningful and constructive mechanism in this respect. So, within the academic year following royal assent, the Government would set out a date for commencement, which will provide a strong signal on the pace of transition required, not just for national government, but also for local government and other key delivery partners. Amendment 19 would also introduce the ability to factor consideration of whether and how commencement may be phased over time into those regulations. For these reasons, I support Amendment 19 and I would encourage other members to vote for it.
Thank you. I call on Liz Smith to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 18.
Nothing further to add, Convener, and I press the amendment.
The question is that Amendment 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 19 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 18. Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that Section 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that Section 5 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that the long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that ends stage 2 consideration of the bill. Can I thank Liz Smith and her officials for their attendance today, the Minister and her officials for their attendance today. On Miles Briggs's point, it has been a very busy morning for Ms Smith, not only getting this bill completed stage 2, but the first MSP, not just in this session, but ever to lodge a motion, given that the long 27-year wait for the men's team to qualify for the World Cup predates the re-establishment of this Parliament in 1999, so congratulations on that as well. That concludes our public session today. The committee will move into private session to consider its final agenda item, and I suspend the meeting for 10 minutes.